Welcome, welcome to the Science of Comprehension for Reading Excellence webinar. We are the Mebane Early Literacy Center. We are a literacy center located in the Cato College of Education at UNC Charlotte. And we are delighted that so many of you are joining us and more of you are coming in. I'm going to say it is so exciting to see so many familiar names in our webinar. And if I could see you in person, I would just give you a big hug for being here. I'm so happy that we have all of you interested and excited about literacy and still pushing forward with shifting to the science of reading and all the great work that you guys have done with letters and supporting your teachers as school administrators. So thank you for being here with us. We are here to talk about the science of reading of comprehension, or why word reading is not enough. And this will be presented by Dr. Kelly Cartwright. The topic that we are talking about is so critical to all the work everyone has been doing, and we're excited to continue moving this forward. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our team. We have Dr. Paola Pilionetta, and she is a professor in the Department of Reading and Elementary Education. Dr. Miranda Fitzgerald, she is an assistant professor in the Department of Reading and Elementary Education. We have Jennifer Mary, she is our administrative support associate and also a doctoral candidate in curriculum and instruction. And I am Dr. Angela Preston. I am the director of the Mebane Early Literacy Center. We have a few tidbits that we would like to go through. I'm going to keep these short because we have lots of great things to share with all of you today. All of you are muted because this is a larger webinar, and we want to make sure that Dr. Cartwright is able to share and have a great audio experience. We also still want your questions, so please use the chat box if you have some questions throughout the session. And then Dr. Cartwright will use the chat box as well for you to be responding through the work that she's doing in her presentation. So we appreciate your participation as we move through this next hour. We will have dedicated time for the Q&A at the end of our session today. So if you have any specific questions that you want Dr. Cartwright to answer, we will have time for that as well. I'd like you to know that we are recording this webinar, so please know you are here. If you're in the chat and putting in your comments, everything is being recorded. And then at the end, we will post the video to YouTube, and then we'll connect it to our website. So we will have 2 bit.ly links that will take you right to our webpage, where we'll host all of the webinars throughout the whole webinar series that we're doing, and you'll be able to access the videos, any resources that are shared as we go along our journey. So please look out for an email where you will receive the link to the website where we'll have all the videos from this. And we really want to keep our chat focused. We want it to be professional, so we're going to remove any automated AI bots or accounts just to keep this going here forward with us. All right, well, it is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce our esteemed speaker. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Kelly Cartwright, the Spangler Distinguished Professor of Early Child Literacy from UNC Charlotte, and she is also a valued member of our Mebane Early Literacy Center, and she will be presenting for you today on the science of reading comprehension. Dr. Cartwright is a nationally recognized voice in early literacy. She is the co-author of the Active View of Reading model with Dr. Nell Duke, and her recent meta-analysis on active self-regulation earned her the College of Education Award for Excellence in Research. We are absolutely honored to have her here, having her join us at the university. She's already made a huge impact on what we're doing, and we are ready for her. So she's going to talk about the science of reading comprehension, or why word reading is not enough. So Dr. Cartwright, please take it away.
Thank you, Angela. I was not expecting all of those nice things, and now I'm probably turning pink, but I appreciate you so much. And I'm so excited to be with all of you today to talk about the science of comprehension instruction, or why word reading is not enough, as we are noticing in North Carolina. And we're going to drill down and talk about teaching comprehension components for effective reading. Okay. So here's where we're going. We're going to start with some grows and glows because we are doing some hard work in North Carolina. And then we're going to focus in on what the science says. All right. And drill down even further to see what the science says about this specific kind of reading difficulty. When kids sound great, their word recognition is where it should be, but comprehension is not naturally following like we think it should. And we'll talk about what's involved in the comprehension process and that the ways that we conceptualize comprehension shape our instruction, and then we'll identify from the research components of comprehension that we can teach. And when we teach them, comprehension improves. And I'll give you some brief applications to practice, but on November 18th, we'll have another webinar, our Score Plus Teach webinar, that where Angela, who you just heard from, our director of the Mebane Early Literacy Center, and Mary Durfel at DPI will unpack applications to practice based on what we talk about today. And in the process of doing these things, I'm going to help you identify some myths about the science of reading so that you can walk back into your buildings as science of reading mythbusters, because I think that's changing faulty thinking is maybe not the best way to say it, but shifting thinking toward more accurate and comprehensive perspectives on reading, that's going to help move our students' reading forward. And so it will close with your role, myth busting and look fors in your buildings. So, first, I want to celebrate all the amazing hard work that you've been doing across the state of North Carolina, starting with the passage of the Excellent Public Schools Act and then the years of hard work on letters training. I know educators have done 2 long, rigorous years of letters training, and that hard work has really paid off. This headline from August of 2024 says that once again, our kids, our babies in North Carolina are outperforming kids across the country on those DIBELS assessments. And that's just phenomenal. So you need to pat yourselves on the back because the hard work is providing results, just like we'd hoped. And then we see headlines like this one that came out at the beginning of this month that, again, highlight those glows where we see those continued gains on DIBELS scores in first and second grade in particular, and a surprising mismatch with our third grade EOGs. And that's caused some educators and some legislators to ask, why? Why is this happening? Why are we seeing this weird split between the progress monitoring gains and the third grade EOGs? We thought they would go in line with one another. And so that mismatch is why we're here together today, because we still have work to do. And before we dig into answering that why question, I want to talk about our assessments in North Carolina. So DIBELS that you use all the time to progress monitor at the beginning, middle, and end of the year, it assesses primarily components of word recognition and fluent word reading. We have the maze for comprehension and vocabulary, but not all students get those. And the bulk of the assessments we're giving focus on fluent word recognition, right? And then the third grade EOGs focus primarily on reading comprehension and vocabulary. So they, of course, require that you read words, but they're not assessing your word reading in the same way. So looking at that weird split that one article pointed out between DIBELS scores and EOG scores, that's led some educators to ask, well, maybe that the science of reading is just not working and we should scrap it and go back to what we were doing before. And I want to take a quick look at our implementation timeline to think about how we answer that question. Did the science of reading not work? Well, I colored the descriptions of the assessments. We'll go back to those. DIBELS is blue, EOGs are green. And you can look at the implementation of letters. Our educators in North Carolina did letters Volume 1, which focuses on word recognition and fluent word reading, first. And then a year later, the implementation of the green things happened, comprehension and vocabulary. And we're actually still in the process of implementing comprehension and vocabulary and making those critical shifts in instruction. And this 24-25 school year is where that article got those data. Okay. So educators' number one support request that we see across the state when the people at Mebane Early Literacy Center are talking to educators, when in my work with the distinguished professors around the state, as I talk with educators in my everyday work, every time we talk with them, we're hearing that I've got word recognition down pat. I know how to do that, but I really think we need support with vocabulary and comprehension, especially comprehension. It's tough to teach. That's why we're here. So if we think about the answer to the question, did the science of reading not work? My resounding answer here would be, of course it's working. It's in progress. We need to continue our forward motion. We're not done. You can't implement everything in 1 year or a couple of years and expect it to magically work. We are in the process and we're still shifting in the green stuff. And so let's move on and talk about our first myth. And our first myth that I sometimes see and that sometimes may lead to that question, did the science of reading not work, is that the science of reading is word recognition, phonics, and fluency. The science of reading is way more than that. And you can see that even in the definition that's in our legislation. And I know that that definition may not be everyone's favorite definition, but the important thing to take away here is that there are blue things here, the word recognition, fluent word reading, but also green things, vocabulary, oral language, and comprehension. Science of reading is comprehensive. It involves research evidence on all aspects of literacy from a variety of disciplines. It's not just the phonics and word recognition part. So think big because we're doing big things in North Carolina. So what does the science say? Well, we know that the scientific evidence on literacy says that it's massive. It involves oodles of processes going on in our heads at the same time, like phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge and decoding and word recognition, fluency, vocabulary breadth, how many words we know, but also depth, how much we know about each word, and oral language comprehension, understanding what is said and read to us, and strategic knowledge, but also things like syntax and text structure and morphological awareness. There are oodles of things that we're having to manage at once to comprehend a text. And educators learned about all of these things and more in letters training. And that's critical to think about. And this complexity, all of these, I'm pointing to my screen. Sorry if my hands get in the way. This complexity, it's hard to even imagine because for you and I, when we read a text, all of this stuff just happens fluidly and automatically, unless we come to a word we don't know or comprehension breaks down or we get interrupted. But even though it involves a lot of processes, we have one goal. And the only purpose for reading is to comprehend the author's message. That's why we read. We don't read to be accurate. We don't read to sound like talking and be fluent. We read to comprehend the author's message. And this quote continues, for a long while, it was assumed that once a reader was able to identify the words on a page, comprehension of the text would follow automatically. And that has turned out not to be the case, as we see in North Carolina. Dibbles scores are in place. Kids are identifying words, but the scores on the EOGs aren't following automatically. In fact, this assumption was the basis for the Early Intervention Reading Initiative in the state of Virginia. The legislators assumed that if we could get every child reading words by third grade, that comprehension scores on the state tests, on the NAEP, would just naturally follow. And I'll tell you, the comprehension fairy does not come along, wave a wand, and magically make comprehension happen just because children can read the words. Now, don't get me wrong, reading the words is essential. If a child has word reading difficulties, comprehension will break down. You cannot understand a text if you cannot get words off of a page. But that is not enough. And sometimes, as is the case with that weird split between scores that we see, even when all these things seem to be in place, get this, comprehension still looks like this for some of our students. So it's as though something beneath the surface, think of our iceberg here, something beneath the surface, or maybe they're wrecking their comprehension ships, or maybe it's missing and everything just falls apart. And that's why we're here together today. And I want to talk about these particular students, the students for whom it seems like everything's together, but then when we ask them to comprehend a text, it all just falls apart. So these students, there's decades of research on these students, and that research says that there's a surprising mismatch between word recognition skills and comprehension, reading comprehension skills. And the researchers who study these kids say they have specific reading comprehension difficulties or reading comprehension deficits. So we can abbreviate both with RCD, or poor comprehenders. And teachers for decades, this is Dolch, our sight word guy from 1960, he called them word callers, and we've used that term ever since to describe the fact that kids call words from a page with no apparent understanding of what they mean. And in practice, they sound like great readers. They're flying under the radar. Parents think they're fine, especially when instruction focuses primarily on word recognition and assessments focus primarily on word recognition. Teachers think they're fine. And then we say, hey, can you retell this? What do you think Jim did in this story? Who's Jim, right? They don't make inferences. They have this really inflexible focus on the word reading part of reading, where decoding is their focus, without attention to meaning. They're not able to shift their attention to meaning. And that's what we see in classrooms. So myth number 2 that I want to dispel right now is that reading comprehension will naturally follow if fluent word recognition is in place. And North Carolina data and research on RCD show that this is not the case. And the other thing that research shows and that we'll unpack today is that components of comprehension must be taught explicitly, just the same way that we teach components of word recognition. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about how you can use your data to identify these students. So for a moment, I want you to think about these students and see if you can tell from these DIBELS data. We've got the word reading fluency, non-word reading fluency, their oral reading fluency, that's words correct per minute, and the maze comprehension scores. And I want you to see if you can identify any students that fit that RCD profile. Great word recognition, but surprisingly poor comprehension. And just put their names in the chat. And then I will see, sometimes it lets me see my controls and sometimes not. So I see names. Good job. Love it. Definitely. Sarah's coming up a lot. Who else do you see? Anybody else? I see Sarah and Andrew. Sarah, Andrew. You're picking exactly the same students that I pick, okay? And you're very good at this. You've not gotten any of the distractor students. So you picked exactly the same students that I identified. Andrew Carter and Sarah Jones. Ta-da! They have wonderful word recognition skills. They're in the green. They're great. And Sarah, she's even in the blue here. All right. But her comprehension is surprisingly poor. Her comprehension is surprisingly poor. Andrew's comprehension is surprisingly low. He's below grade level, even though his word reading is where it should be. Now, sometimes people say Charles, and I would argue, looking at Charles, his problem is not the same thing. His profile of data suggests that he's got trouble decoding. He needs some explicit systematic phonics instruction so that he can pull the words off the page. Megan, in contrast, seems to need a little extra support with decoding and maybe some support with fluency, and perhaps her comprehension will come up. So even though Andrew and Megan have the same score, the reason for that score is different. Even though Charles and Sarah have the same comprehension score. The reasons for the score are different, and the kinds of interventions they need are different. Charles needs explicit systematic phonics instruction, maybe some intensive intervention. Sarah doesn't need that. Her word recognition is fine. She needs something else, and that's where we're going today. So you may be wondering, well, how many of these kids might I see in my building, right? And you'll see Andrew and Sarah here, where they're going to travel with us through the rest of the presentation. And researchers around the world, across many languages, have done exactly what we did on the previous slide, looking at profiles of learners, and discovered that about 20 to 30% of struggling readers fit that RCD profile with strong word recognition and surprisingly poor reading comprehension. That doesn't match, right? The comprehension doesn't match the word recognition skill. And I put at least here because it's possible that if we provide lots and lots of word recognition instruction and we get that super strong, but we're not providing similarly structured and explicit comprehension instruction, that we can make our students look like Andrew and Sarah because we're not providing the kinds of explicit systematic comprehension instruction that they also need. So think about that. Just file it away for a moment. And that brings us to our third myth. Because I've heard educators say, well, first we teach learning to read, and then we teach reading to learn. We're focusing on word recognition first, and then we shift our attention more to comprehension in the upper grades. And that's problematic. And it's problematic because that's not what Charles said. She observed reading development and she saw this shift, this pattern of development in children where they do learn to read. And as they get better at it, they're able to read to learn on purpose. But this was not an instructional recommendation. She never said that we should not focus on comprehension in early grades. And in fact, decades of research show that reading comprehension should be taught explicitly from kindergarten. And this QR code goes to an IES practice guide with wonderful comprehension instruction recommendations. So this is not something we wait for. We don't teach word recognition in, K to 2 and then start teaching comprehension in 3 and hope their EOGs are okay. We start teaching comprehension alongside word recognition from day 1 so that they're strong in everything when they get to that EOG in 3rd grade. And these ideas about comprehension are essential. And even Edward Dolch, I did the math this morning, this 1960 book was 65 years ago. 65 years ago, he wrote a textbook on teaching reading. And he said, we keep meaning foremost, but the children still must know the words. It's not a case of words or meaning. It's a case of meaning and words. They do both. And this aligns with another great quote from a fun article called, it's a reading Research Quarterly article called Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Phonics, but Were Afraid to Ask. And even in a phonics-focused article, Steve Stahl and colleagues said children must learn to think of words as having both meaning and sound. It's not just about sounding out, it's about linking the meaning to what they're doing. So let's shift and talk about what the comprehension process involves then. And because how we think about the comprehension process is going to shape how we teach our students. And this involves building a structure in our heads as we read. Comprehension involves taking the pieces in a text and the pieces in our own heads that I think of as building blocks, right? Just like these Lego blocks, you are taking them and you are trying to create a unified whole, all in your mind, right? The scholars that study this call it a situation model or a mental model of a text's meaning. And again, parts come from the text, parts come from our minds, like our knowledge, and we put them all together and make this wonderful coherent whole. The goal of comprehension is cohesion. We're taking all the pieces, the words, the phrases, the sentences, the ideas, and we're trying to make this idea, this model, this situation model, a cohesive whole. But all of it's invisible. They can't see you doing it. They can't see themselves doing it. They don't even know what the processes are because comprehension is invisible. And that's why they need direct, explicit support in learning to do these things. So for us and our students, reading comprehension involves active thinking and noticing aspects of texts and knowledge that help us construct meaning. And this brings us to our fourth myth, 4A, reading comprehension is an outcome. We often, and legislators often, talk about reading comprehension as an outcome. It's the thing we're going for. It's why we're teaching all the other stuff so that they can then comprehend. But really and truly, it's a multifaceted process of structure building that we also have to teach explicitly. The outcome's not going to happen if they don't get instruction in the process. And myth 4B that we hope to dispel today is that you teach it by asking questions. Now, good questioning is an important instructional practice to know about, but that's not what I'm talking about here. There has been research since the 1970s when Dolores Durkin went into elementary classrooms to look at comprehension instruction. She was curious, do people teach kids how to comprehend or what? What are they doing? And the most common instructional move in 1978 was asking comprehension questions, assessing, which isn't really fair if you think about it. If I don't tell someone how to do something and then I test them on it, it's not good educational practice. The same way that if my goal is to put together a car engine and a mechanic comes in and just starts asking me questions about the car engine, I'm not going to have any idea how to do that. The mechanic has to teach me the sub processes for putting it together before I can create that coherent whole. The same way that we educators need to provide our students with the sub processes of comprehension so they can make that coherent whole in their heads. 20 years later, Michael Presley observed the same thing. 20 years-ish after that, maybe not quite 20, Molly Ness observed the same thing. And this year, Phil Capon observed yet again the same thing. The most common instructional move that we make when we're teaching comprehension is to ask questions rather than teach kids specific processes to help them understand how to comprehend texts. And I have a link to a great little piece, I think it's an Ed Week piece, about this article and his research findings here. And so what that shows is that we as a nation have more to learn about how we can best teach comprehension to help kids to engage in that process in deliberate, intentional, active ways. And this also helps to highlight the idea that the way that we conceptualize reading, it shapes our instruction and it shapes our students' outcomes. And so I want to talk about some of the ways that we conceptualize reading. And I know that you know this one, the simple view of reading from back in 1986, where decoding or word recognition and language comprehension are essential to make reading comprehension happen. And this model leads us to ask some important instructional questions like, do my students have all the word recognition skills they need? Do they have all the language comprehension skills they need? And those are important questions because we need all that stuff to be able to comprehend a text. This model tends to lead us to think about instruction as making sure that we fill students up with enough decoding or word recognition skill, enough language comprehension skill, and we assume that if we do that, that reading comprehension will naturally follow. And as we have seen in our own data from the article I shared earlier, and in research data, that isn't always the case. And the other model that you may be really familiar with is Scarborough's reading rope, which is a wonderful expansion of the simple view. And the reason that Hollis Scarborough put together her rope was to provide practice implications for teachers. She wanted us to understand how to unpack language comprehension and word recognition with all of these subcomponents within each area of skills. And this model, again, leads us to ask these same important questions about our students. Do they have the word recognition and language comprehension skills they need? But it also adds a really important extra feature, and that's that Skilled reading involves combining these. It involves putting them together. It involves braiding them together and integrating them because skilled readers integrate these seamlessly, but it doesn't tell us how. It's as though that braiding part, highlighted as important, is not explained fully. And we don't know how readers learn to integrate these. The rope doesn't say. And this model, again, leads us to think about making sure that they have all the word recognition skills they need, they have all the language comprehension skills they need, and we hope that reading comprehension will follow. But for kids like Andrew and Sarah, what research is showing is that these two-factor models don't fully explain reading comprehension for these students. They explain about half of reading comprehension. So you can see if we were to fill up this oval with the variables that predict their reading comprehension, word recognition and language comprehension account for about half of Andrew and Sarah's reading comprehension. And that leads us to ask, just like we did with the iceberg image, what's missing? What's not there? Why are these children not comprehending text? It's not word recognition and language comprehension. The two-factor models would say, give them more language comprehension. They can read the words, but it's not doing the trick. So that is why situations like that, the fact that the two-factor models are not explaining outcomes for every child, that's why my colleague Nell Duke and I proposed the active view of reading. Understanding these students' difficulties and closing reading opportunity gaps means that we need to take a more nuanced view of reading that's informed by recent science. This model came out in 2021. And it reflects the evidence, there's scientific evidence that word recognition over here and language comprehension over here are not separate buckets of skills. And the other models tend to make us think that way, but they're not separate. They actually overlap and they interact. And in fact, this shared portion between them in study after study is bigger than the independent portions of the others alone. So let's think about this. So bridging, word recognition and language comprehension need to be integrated by readers. They like fluency. We are decoding while processing meaning. Morphology supports both word recognition and meaning construction because we're figuring out what words mean and how they fit into the overall model of text meaning. So this bridging processes component is new, representing that overlap and the requirement that readers have to coordinate these processes to be good comprehenders. And the other piece that's new is that reading is active. Reading requires that kids actively self-regulate so that they drive their word recognition, drive their language comprehension, and actively integrate the two to make reading comprehension happen. And we tested this model. Well, let me take a step back. I'll get to the testing in a second. This model leads us to ask the same questions we asked with the other two models, but also, can our students coordinate and integrate word recognition and language comprehension skills? And do they have the active self-regulation skills they need to make word recognition and language comprehension happen and to coordinate them in service of comprehension? And so before we move on, I want to use our friends Ernie and Bert here to illustrate what I mean about bridging being different from the other two and separate and extra skill. We all have played the game, pat your head, rub your tummy. I can pat my head all by itself and be fine. I can assess word recognition and it looks fine. I can rub my tummy and it's easy by itself. And when I assess language comprehension by itself, kids do fine. But when I have to do them together, it's harder. It takes a weird third coordination ability. And when we're asking kids to comprehend text, we're not asking them to do word recognition by itself and language comprehension by itself. We're asking them to integrate these processes, which is harder because it requires that coordination. So when we tested this model, I should note it's an instructional model. Every component in the model, when taught, improves reading comprehension. And we tested this with an instructional meta-analysis, meaning that we looked at studies that taught these constructs and had reading comprehension outcomes. And we saw that word recognition and language comprehension had significant effects when taught on reading comprehension outcomes. And bridging processes and active self regulation processes had additional significant effects over and above those we saw with word recognition and language comprehension. So this model gives us additional targets for intervention, which are especially effective with our students who are our neediest learners who need extra support. Now, I want to attach this to something that you learned in your letters training to help you think about how we coordinate and integrate word recognition and language comprehension. And this is orthographic mapping. Orthographic mapping, according to Linnea Airy, is connecting letter sounds, right? Spellings, pronunciations, and meanings of specific words in memory. We orthographically map words and they become sight words when we connect up the spellings, the sounds, and the meanings. So D-O-G, D-D-O-A-G-G, and that becomes the pronunciation of the word dog. And oh, that's my dog. She's Cammy and she's upstairs not barking, thankfully. But this process, and as an aside, I want to note that the research shows that teaching individual phoneme, grapheme correspondences is what's important for orthographic mapping to make these sight words stick. When we teach chunks of letters, it's not as effective as when we teach individual letter sound correspondences. And the next slide tells you why. And I should also note that executive skills facilitate links between these components. And this is why, because we have reading brains. That's my granddaughter, had to bring her in. So she's learning how to connect sounds to meaning. So when she says mama and dada, and she's now calling me nana for granny, good enough, I'll take it. When she says those things, she uses the parts of her brain that she came with, the part that's devoted to meanings, the parts that's devoted to sounds. And your excellent instruction builds the visual portion. It builds that letterbox. It repurposes part of the visual brain. You're literally changing brains. It blows my mind. And you're repurposing that part of the visual brain and hooking it into the other parts. So just like with orthographic mapping, we're hooking spellings to sounds to meanings. And that excellent instruction, what we know from the research on how the reading brain is built, needs to have those individual sound rather than chunks of sounds and letters at the same time. So those individual letter sound connections are what's so important for building that letterbox. And what we know about this is that our executive skills, which are in our frontal lobes behind our forehead, they create links between these hubs in the reading brain. And kids like Andrew and Sarah and kids with dyslexia have weaker executive skills and weaker links in their reading brain. And that's something that we can change with instruction. So myth 5, I can't count today, I've lost track. Myth 5 is that the science of reading is the simple view and rope. I've heard lots of educators say that. I've seen blog posts that the science of reading is the simple view. The science of reading is the rope. No, 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 no. The science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of research that's continuing to grow from disciplines like cognitive science and education and human development and linguistics and neuroscience and psychology. It's not a particular model. It's not a particular model. It's the research that might have inspired those models. And the research continues to grow. Science progresses, research continues, and new knowledge emerges. That's why I love my job so much, because I get to learn new things all the time. And new learning means that we have new and more ways to reach our students. And like we always quote with Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better. And I discovered this quote this morning from Emily Hanford. Don't put too much trust in any one program or any one idea. And I could substitute model. Keep asking questions. Stay curious. Stay humble. There's a lot to learn. And that is an important thing to think about when we think about the science of reading. It's not this settled blob over here that tells us what to do. It's not a curriculum. It's research evidence that tells us the best ways to teach our students to help them learn to read. And that research helps us to identify key comprehension components so that we can support students like Andrew and Sarah. And these are just a few of the citations. There are decades of research. This Oak Hill paper is one where she reviews her 4 decades of research that she's done on kids just like Andrew and Sarah. And the things that emerge in that research are things like recognizing and using text structures, both expository and narrative text structures, recognizing and using language structures like syntax, phrases and sentences, right? And morphology, the structure within individual words. So see, structures can be at the word level, the sentence level, the text level, and also integration and inference skills. Inference skills are tough because, again, they're invisible, kids can't see them. And if we're making an inference, it's often from stuff that's not even in the text, right? We make text connecting inferences that are also called text-based or local coherence inferences. So we're helping to build coherence bit by bit as we make our way through a text. Gap filling inferences are knowledge-based. This is why we talk about the importance of knowledge to comprehension. Global coherence inferences. So we're filling in gaps in the text with our own knowledge to get an overall picture of what the text is about. But we also are making inferences about word meanings. If we come to a text or a word in a text that we don't know the meaning of, we can use context to figure out the meaning. I didn't add a caveat here. I don't think I need to because of your excellent training, but I'm just going to say we're not using context to figure out how to pronounce a word, how to decode a word. Context is for meaning. Our marvelous word recognition skills are for decoding. Okay, so meanings. What else? Well, recognizing and using what I call sticky words that promote coherence. Things like pronoun references and understanding that my granddaughter Ellie likes bananas. She ate a banana at my house. She, Ellie, they connect together and provide that sticky glue that sticks those sentences together. So pronoun references, connectives also help us, like because or so or on the other hand or and. All of those conjunctions help us to stick ideas in a text together. And knowledge and vocabulary, especially vocabulary depth, are things that can be taught explicitly. And kids like Andrew and Sarah have trouble with each of these things. So when we think vocabulary depth, we think about knowing things about words. Remember, knowing more about an individual word. So knowing that the word ball can mean a fancy dance and it can mean sporting equipment, and there's oodles of kinds of sporting equipment that, or you could have the ball of your foot even. There are lots of meanings for the word ball. There are synonyms for ball, maybe sports equipment or toy, where people may use that to substitute for ball in a text. Knowing antonyms, lots of depth of knowledge about words is important. And monitoring comprehension, being able to recognize when something in the text is inconsistent or when we missed an important detail and need to go back, or we're interrupted and we need to reread to build our model of text meaning. Again, we're establishing coherence. For Andrew and Sarah, they have a pile of blocks. They might not even know where the blocks are because they don't recognize how their knowledge connects to text, and they don't know all of the little processes and pieces to put together to build that organized whole. And all of these comprehension components tax another set of skills that are also lower in children like Andrew and Sarah. And these skills are in that active self-regulation bubble of the active view of reading, the executive function skills. So you might have heard executive functions or executive skills, but these are skills that help us to be CEOs of our own brains. So we're managing our own brains. I've got two screens and a clicker and all these ideas. I'm managing all of this in my working memory and I'm shifting between things. When we leave the house with our cup of coffee and our keys and our phone and our purse and our book bag and all of those things, and we're not forgetting anything, and we're not forgetting the child who we take to school, all of those things rely on our organization and our planning and our working memory and our ability to shift attention when needed. Those kinds of skills help us to do all the things. All the things. They are mental skills we use to manage our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to achieve goals, and they're at the heart of self-regulation. And in reading, they help us manage comprehension. And for a long time, we thought that you measure general executive skills and that they're going to influence reading skills, but that's not how it happens. We now know that reading requires that our executive control over reading develops within reading. So we learn to exert our executive control over reading when we're reading and managing aspects of tasks. Those reading specific executive skills contribute to comprehension beyond other important predictors, and we can teach them. That's the beauty. But importantly, when we teach, we have to understand that weak executive control over reading undermines reading comprehension. So we're putting the thinking on the table in very concrete ways to help our students and support those weak executive skills. So these are the ones that are weak in students like Andrew and Sarah: planning, organization, cognitive flexibility, inhibition, working memory. I've given you examples here of how they play out in reading. You're reading with a goal in mind. You're recognizing and using text and language structure, shifting between letter, sound, and meaning focus aspects, which Andrew and Sarah don't do. It's suppressing irrelevant word meanings or holding multiple text parts in mind to make inferences and supply our own knowledge. So you can see how these components of comprehension and these mental skills that help us do those components of comprehension, if they're all weak, we have a problem. We can't weave together this coherent whole. So here are some instructional implications. I'm not going to give you all the implications. Angela and Mary Durfel are going to talk with you about these in the Teach Plus score, or the folks that you send to that webinar. And I'm just going to whet your appetite here. So before we talk about structure, I'm going to do structure, bridging, vocabulary depth, and inference really quickly. So cognitive science shows us that when we build knowledge structures in our minds, we do it gradually, starting with a basic framework, then adding details to get to that whole. So we're building a text structure. We don't start with details. If I'm having them read closely and parse individual words, that doesn't help them see the big picture. Start with a framework and help them to hang the details onto that framework. Research shows this also works for building models of text meaning, like this CAT strategy that I'm going to show you on the next slide. The bottom line here is that it's harder to think about the details before you have an overall framework to hang them on. So here we see, and there are articles about this strategy at these links. Here we see that we can use text structure to help kids build that mental model of text meaning. So we start with a question to identify whether the text fits one of these three general structures. And then we use a sentence stem, a basic little bitty structure, to help them get a general idea of what it's about, that main idea of what the text is about. And once they do that, then they have that thing to hang, that framework to hang more details on. And then they can add more details to create a summary. And this is analogous to what we just saw with the house. Framing comes first, then we add the details. You do not put in countertops and light fixtures before you have done the framing. Framing happens first to provide a mental framework and support that weak working memory for kids who don't have it. You can also directly teach expository text structures, again, supporting their noticing and using of organization. You can explicitly teach structure with morphology via word frames. So here you might teach roots, suffixes, and prefixes and have them take words apart, rethink, ing, and explain why you're taking it apart this way, how it helps you decode, how it helps you notice meaning. We can assess and teach bridging. This task, it's a graphophonological semantic cognitive flexibility task. So it's flexibility within reading. It reflects the coordination of word recognition and language comprehension, and it contributes to both children's and adults' reading comprehension. You can see these words are sorted by how they sound. The B words are here, the S words are up here, clothing's over here, and cleaning supplies are over here. Kids like Andrew and Sarah and the grown-ups that they become are they have much more difficulty with this task, but we can teach this kind of bridging, teach this cognitive flexibility, and it improves reading comprehension and reading fluency. So we have them sort along one dimension first and then reshuffle and sort along another dimension to help them see those dimensions. And then we have them do the tricky part. Fill in the blanks, these sort completions where the words are sorted by sound, s and b and meaning, cleaning supplies and clothing. And they have to think about both the sound and the meaning in order to fill in the blank correctly. So things that might fit are blouse, boots, belt, bonnet, the B word that is also clothing. And when we teach it, comprehension improves. Vocabulary depth, another thing that requires inhibition when we're doing reading in school in various classes. Sometimes we expect students to learn or to know academic meanings for words that they already have a meaning for, okay? And they have to inhibit the common meaning and pay attention to the more specialized meaning, like sentence in language arts or math, or some. Some of your cookies when you're hanging out with a friend is part of your cookies. Some of your cookies in math is all the cookies. And finally, inferences. I typically tell students that authors don't write everything down and they expect readers to figure out missing information. So thinking about Sadie, you probably inferred Sadie's a dog, the stranger's an intruder, and the stranger is entering Sadie's home. Well, you filled the gap with Sadie. Sadie could be a girl or a mom, or number two is a local coherence text connecting inference. And then number three is a global coherence gap filling inference because we're assuming Sadie's home. It could be a store. We don't know where she is. And this kind of inferencing demands working memory. And so it means that we need to put that process on the table. This is all the stuff you had to hold in your head. Barking and broken window came from text. Sadie and intruder came from your own knowledge. And this is a lot to hold in your working memory if working memory is something you struggle with. And so I'm going to show you how we can map inferences and again, put that thinking on the table for students. So with this little story, it was 8:55 and the school bell rings at 9 and Andy was pedaling as fast as he could because he was worried he might miss his test. If I ask where he's going, you're going to tell me school. Text connecting inference. If I ask how he's getting there, you'll probably say riding a bike, but it could be a paddle boat, it could be a big wheel, it could be a unicycle, but you'll probably say bike. These are hard for kids, and this is why, because they have to hold all of that stuff in their working memory. So if we provide concrete, visible supports, put that thinking on the table and map inferences this way. So text information is here that we have to link up and then showing students how their own knowledge gets supplied to make it make sense. That concrete inference mapping improves reading comprehension for kids like Andrew and Sarah in expository texts and in narrative texts. So let me remind you before we finish up that when we support executive skills within comprehension, it's always within comprehension, right? We're putting the thinking on the table to help them to build that model of text meaning. And I've included more resources for you, which we're going to put on the Milk website for you so you will have them. And I want to talk about your role, okay? I alluded to this all throughout the talk. You walk back into your building as a science of reading myth buster, helping educators to see that science of reading is more than just word recognition. It's a comprehensive interdisciplinary science that includes all the literacy skills. And that reading comprehension is not going to naturally follow just because word recognition is in place. That reading comprehension and its components have to be taught explicitly. Okay. Number three, comprehension is something that has to be taught from day one, from kindergarten onward. It's not that we teach learning to read and then we shift to teaching reading to learn. Comprehension is for everyone, okay? And fourth, for A, reading comprehension is an outcome. We know now it's a process of structure building, and we teach it by asking questions. The research shows that teachers all across America think that we teach reading comprehension by asking questions because it's our most common instructional move. So lets us move toward teaching how to comprehend by explicitly teaching components and putting that thinking on the table before assessing our students. And finally, last but not least, that the simple view and rope are the science of reading. And we know that science progresses, it's not static. And the views that we have shape instruction. So let's keep moving and learning and taking our students forward with us. When you walk into your building, think about these things. Think about the language about comprehension that you hear. Are people talking about it as an outcome? Or are people talking about it as a process and talking about how to teach the things within it? Is comprehension instruction occurring in the early grades? When you walk into a K classroom or you pick up a lesson plan, is there comprehension instruction present in all of these grades? And in data meetings and discussions that examine student profiles across reading skills, like we did early today in this webinar, make sure that you're doing that with your teams to identify underlying profiles. So even when students have the same comprehension scores, like Charles and Sarah, we see that the source of their problems is very, very different. Well, we need to look for explicitly teaching comprehension components versus only asking questions. So make sure we're telling them how to comprehend, that we're making statements. Our comprehension lessons shouldn't be filled with questions. Our comprehension lessons should be filled with how-to instructions. Okay. And we're putting that thinking on the table with concrete supports. We're using graphic organizers to help them see that thinking on the table in front of us. And we're explicitly teaching that coherence is the goal, that we're targeting those comprehension components so kids can build that coherent model of text meaning. That's a lot. I've left 3 whole minutes for questions. I'm sorry about that. Angela, come back.
I'm here. All right. Oh, Kelly, thank you, Dr. Cartwright. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. And we had just a few questions come in before everybody goes. We do have some resources that we want to share with you in the chat, so we'll get to those as well. But one of the first questions that came through was addressing how we assess students in first grade and kindergarten, because in Dibbles, we're looking at second grade and on is where we're getting further into oral reading fluency and maze. But what are your suggestions around assessments in that kindergarten, first grade space?
Wow, that's a tough question, and it's one that I get everywhere that I go all across the country. People don't know, well, there aren't assessments, and that's the hard part. So it may be that you're doing curriculum-based assessment. You are talking to them about what they've just read. You're asking them to retell. You're looking if to see if they have the components, that they know the characters, that they're telling sub-events in the appropriate order. This is a place where the field needs to grow. We need to be able to assess comprehension and support comprehension with all the students.
That's great. Thank you. We had another question about your model and the evidence supporting your model. Looking at comparing models where they have been run through other RCTs, and so wanting to know a little bit about the research that supports your model.
Oh, absolutely. Every component in the active view of reading, and remember, much of the active view of reading is the same as simple view and rope, right? Word recognition, language comprehension, they're the same. But every single component And I should take a step back. The simple view originally was based on correlational research, regression analyses. It wasn't intervention research. Since then, we've done a lot of intervention work to know that teaching these things, especially the word recognition things, results in great reading comprehension, but it doesn't for all, as we've seen with Andrew and Sarah. But every component in the active view of reading is supported by instructional research with control groups that show that when we teach it, it improves reading comprehension. And then the meta analysis that I shared with you that we did with Matt Burns, it also shows that teaching each of these four buckets of skills produces improvements in reading comprehension, and the bridging and the active self-regulation improve comprehension over and above what we've seen with word recognition and language comprehension. So we're adding, we're not taking away. We're showing where the science can, that we can draw from the science to know more things about what our students do, but we're not just pulling in what's related to reading outcomes. We're pulling in items that we know when we teach them move that needle on reading comprehension.
Thank you, Dr. Cartwright. If you wouldn't mind showing the last slide, we are already at 10:30 and I just wanted to share what's next. So please complete our survey. It will only take 1-2 minutes to do. We will send a video and I'm excited to share our next webinar is going to be called Score Plus Teach. This is taking the content that Dr. Cartwright shared with us today and making it applicable for educators. So Mary Durfel, who is the Assistant Director of the Office of Early Learning, is here with us today, and her and I will be co-leading this webinar series this year, and we will take the content from our webinar for administrators and we will address it to educators, so show how it's connected to letters training and then more classroom application. So we highly recommend that you share the flyer, which should be going into the chat right now, with your teachers and have them attend. Our next SCORE session is going to be on knowledge and comprehension, and that will be led by Dr. Courtney Hatan. And that is also a link for the flyer should be in the chat for both of those. And then finally, I'm really excited to share we have a MELC brief, and this is a research brief that we wrote for the Active View of Reading article that was written by Nell Duke and Kelly Cartwright. So that should help translate some of the research into educators and help us on our literacy journey. Well, we thank you all for staying. I know we are 2 minutes over, so I appreciate you being here with us. And we look forward to getting your feedback and helping us as we build this webinar series for administrators. And thank you so much for all you do for literacy. Have a great afternoon.
Bye bye, everyone.